Man is a microcosm, or a little world, because he is an extract from all the stars and planets of the whole firmament, from the earth and the elements, and so he is their quintessence. Paracelsus. Through virtue we can transcend suffering. By using the elemental modes, we can transform torment into happiness. I will be doing a much more extensive series on virtues and vices in the future, but to bridge over to these concepts, I wanted to explore the connection through the lens of the elemental modes. For this, we will examine a particular set of myths, which you are probably familiar with, but might have overlooked. These have to do with punishments issued by the gods to a handful of particularly blasphemous individuals. From the metaphors of punishment, we can get a sense of the fear each element is facilitating, and the antidote for each lies within its own nature. I hadn't noticed this pattern before myself, but stumbled upon it recently in exploring other myths. So we will start with the most well-known, Prometheus. Prometheus is associated with the element of fire, which he stole from the gods and gifted to mankind. He is a Titan, with a creation myth crediting him with sculpting man out of clay, and is generally regarded as the patron of science, discovery, and invention. He is loved as a champion of humans, but the gods punish him for his attempt to take power from them and raise the status of man nearer to divinity. He is damned to Tartarus, bound to a rock, and an eagle is sent to eat out his liver every day. Each night it regrows, and he is eviscerated again in an endless cycle. So the punishment for the fire drives of pride, ambition, risk-taking, and so on, is a perpetual burning or wounding or internal strife. One way I would like to tie the elemental concepts together is to look at them in terms of dimensions or domains, and the words we might use to describe those. For fire, this is the energy or temperature of an interaction, or how a happening unfolds. This adverbial form describes the animation, intensity, speed, or energy level of a situation. When this descriptor pushes into the superlative, outside forces apply restrictions, as we see in the Prometheus metaphor, in the binding to the rock, or reality. An energy thus contained with no outlet becomes self-destructive and uncomfortable. An excess of fire energy can make one feel as if they are being torn apart from the inside out, like something is fighting to escape in the form of emotions like anger and excitement. This self-destructive urge, once turned outward, manifests as aggression, judgment, and righteousness. Reaction to the other becomes derisive, harsh, and mean. In order to transmute this combative energy, the elemental virtue valor is used. Also known as courage, the fire of valor gives meaning and purpose to outpourings of emotion and energy. In the form of creative and social endeavors, this can be extremely generative. The spirit and zeal are properly channeled by turning what would otherwise be internal frustration or lashing outward into a confident stance in the face of a challenge. Bravery and resolve come very naturally when oriented toward a goal that is felt to be important. Through security of self and healthy competition towards others, the world opens up with opportunities to direct passion toward constructive ends which validate the spirit. When what was once a source of suffering or perceived punishment is transformed via virtue, we are left with a mode of happiness, which also has an elemental quality to it. For fire, this is rapture, a state of excited openness to experience and affirmative acceptance of life. In contrast to feelings of peace, rapture offers us an alert, focused perception of ourselves as a part of the environment, enthralled with it and receptive to its sensations. Sensory input becomes a conduit to the divine, and we experience heightening. We are uplifted to a vantage where we can be better able to witness higher versions of ourselves and seek to identify with them. It is not meant to be interpreted as literally being beamed up to heaven or emancipated from our earthly coil. As with all of these states, it is a particular equilibrium of consciousness we can enter into in order to experience and integrate different facets of ourselves. And we can intentionally cultivate modes by embodying the virtue of that energy. With the four cardinal, directional, or elemental ones, being the most broad, after the trinity of truth, goodness, and beauty. I think in a lot of ways the elemental ones are more accessible than either the trinity or the dualistic yin and yang concepts, which are quite abstract. So it's a good place to start for those looking for a foundation on which to stand and reach for more nuanced spiritual concepts. Next we will examine the myth of Ixion, which I found very fascinating to learn more about. As far as I'm aware, this is the only instance of Zeus being jealous of someone over Hera, and I found this role reversal to be intriguing. After murdering his father-in-law on Earth, Ixion became an exile, and eventually he was brought to live on Olympus. He quickly wore out his welcome by lusting after Hera, who Zeus crafted the likeness out of a cloud to seduce him with. This union is credited with grandfathering the centaurs, and Ixion was then punished by being bound to a flaming, spinning wheel which flies around forever. The main sin was attributed as kinslaying, but I found the cloud detail to be symbolic, and it seems to me the digression was actually fantasizing. Being tied to the wheel, which represents time, its eternal cycles and inevitable redundancy, trapping us in an escapist fantasy, to try to ignore our circumstance leads to even greater madness. The fiery quality of the myth, I think, both points to the need for an inappropriate action, initiation, or risk to escalate the airy mode of overthinking into a situation with perilous consequences. And we see this pairing a lot in other punishment myths, such as Icarus. Quite literally, he is escaping the maze of the subconscious by artificing wings to fly away. But in his curiosity and overconfidence, he flies up too close to the sun and the wax melts off, sending him hurtling down to his death. The heat, the real danger of the circumstance, is temporarily avoided by some clever invention or ruse, but the truth catches up. The flights of fantasy must be tempered by respect for reality in order to avoid ruination. Air might be thought of as the axis of time, that variable we so often chart our graphs to and orient our lives. It forms such an interesting paradox with space, the actual container within which these interactions are occurring, the only tangible authority we are bound to, and yet, time, this construct we have defined for ourselves, which works differently for different beings, at different scales, and is arbitrary in so many ways. It seems to have a stronger hold on us than the space we occupy, and it dictates both the when and why of a situation. Air also seems to be quite essential to fortune, as luck is where opportunity meets preparation. The relationship between being in the right place at the right time seems particularly primal. Within its own mode, however, air redeems itself by the virtue of alacrity. We see evidence of this in the myth because the dispenser of the punishment is not actually Zeus himself, who throws lightning bolts and misses, but the quick Hermes who catches and binds him, initially setting him to spin up in the heavens, though eventually he is damned to Tartarus with the others of these primordial transgressions. There is a connection between the evolved form of the energy judging and guiding the lower evolutions and meting out punishments of like kind. The wheel cannot be made to stop spinning, though it did slow for a short time when Orpheus descended to Tartarus in search of Eurydice, and played his lyre, because music has the ability to manipulate our sense of time. Since we cannot stop it, we must instead break the wheel, shatter our illusions about the concept of time and our entrapment in it. And this is done with alacrity, which is swiftness, expedience, or timeliness. The right move at the right time can completely alter the tempo, and through astute observation and synchronization of our headspace with the rhythms of the outer environmental reality, we can see the openings to react to, rather than trying to construct an inner world which we can lord over with our perception of how things should be. Through this shift of frame, which might most appropriately be called a quickening, the virtue of alacrity whisks away our tension of holding on so tightly to the wheel of time and allows us to be propelled by it along the journey of our lives. This state of unattachment or being along for the ride is called bliss, the air mode of happiness. Everything becomes easy by first granting grace inward toward the self, and then extending it outward in the form of kindness to others, and acceptance of life for being whole, just the way it is. Freshness achieved in this way can make room for a world of possibilities, like a lungful of air which is free and open-ended to propel a myriad of actions. Clinging too tightly to specific ideas or conceptions, becoming invested in outcomes which were rooted in mental gymnastics rather than the available resources and energies of the situation, and then running away into our minds when that doesn't work out, blocks our potential for innovation and using quick wit to transcend the limitations of our circumstance. If we try to plan things out in every minute detail, we will clip our own wings and fail to see the beauty that is already surrounding us. By moving on from disappointment quickly and learning not to set our expectations too high to begin with, we can cultivate the mental humility necessary to recognize the harmony of the song we are already a part of. The next denizen of Tartarus is Tantalus, who is invited to feast with the gods but betrayed their trust by stealing ambrosia and revealing divine secrets to man. The affront is very similar to that of Prometheus, and I have heard versions which attribute an attempted theft of the water of life or immortality to the former, so the elemental qualities get mixed in the translations of the crimes themselves. But the punishment is quite clearly a watery one. Tantalus had hosted a banquet for the gods in an attempt to put their wisdom to the test, having secretly sacrificed and cooked his own son to be served to them and forced them to commit the sin of cannibalism. The deception was detected by all but Demeter, who was distracted by grief. And as punishment, Tantalus was burdened with eternal thirst, near a pool that would remain forever out of reach to him, and recede at any time he tried to stoop and drink. To kill one's own children was a transgression particularly taboo to the Olympians, and to assign the punishment of perpetual need is interesting, compared to the violence of some of the others. The pattern seems to be that which you steal is either what you shall be deprived of or overwhelmed with. The combination of filicide and cannibalism seems to really be speaking to the primordial archetype of the devouring parent, particularly in the feminine association with void or space. Eating one's young, in particular, strikes a visceral chord, although we see it much more commonly than is easy to acknowledge in this literal form. We smother our own potential when we engage in negative thought patterns, entertain nihilism, denial, or say no to life. The child is a metaphor for potential, and if we deny ourselves, of course we are doomed to be left forever wanting, unable to fill our own cup. So the true sin here is suicide in some ways, cutting ourselves off from our own happiness and future, either by overthinking, as Tantalus does in his hubris, and trying to catch the gods in weakness to justify his own atheism, or drinking deeply of oblivion by sacrificing part of ourself for some perceived ideal. The lesson then imparted by the punishment is forcing the subject to be self-aware by inducing internal discomfort that the outer world cannot provide relief from. So the cure would then be to turn inward and confront the emotions. Water is the axis of space, the catalyst through which waves are moving. It is the where life is occurring, the place where connections are allowed to be made and happenings may occur. It is passive, receptive, and provides control or resistance to the march of time. Turning full attention to the here and now is a way to control time itself. Living in the moment can prevent you from being swept along. The elemental virtue of water is, for lack of a better word, control. I laughed to myself when the connection was made in my head, and I'm sure anyone who has played against a blue deck will be chuckling along with me. A catalyst delays or moderates the speed of reaction, but the virtue we are pointing to here is not control in the sense of dominance over another. It is self-control, poise, mastery, composure, or sovereignty. There are many other words which might seem fitting, but to me they were all just equivalents for self-awareness, and that doesn't quite get to the heart of it. So control will have to do. With control, the extremes of either self-denial or smothering of others can be transmuted into a state of flow. It's interesting that the water mode operates by noticing patterns, making connections, and linking things together. and those are exactly the type of activities that can effectively put us into flow states. There has been a lot of recent interest in flow from the neurological camps, but I feel it might be used too much as a catch-all for other types of happiness or watered down as Zen. The phenomenon we are specifically talking about here is a state of shutting off the criticism and rationalization of the prefrontal cortex and airy mode, which has to do with the perception of time, and losing yourself so completely that you lose track of that amidst the surrender of what you are doing. This mode creates space to truly unify and balance all of the others, and it might be argued that focusing cultivation of the water mode could have the most significant overall positive impact. The states of happiness, besides being desirable in their own right for freedom from suffering and relief amidst pain, also provide different modes of healing. Different types of wounding may require particular elemental states to facilitate their recovery, and these do seem to mirror relationships found in biology, such as high oxygen levels facilitating the closure of lacerations and burns. Water is associated with washing or cleansing, cooling, neutralization of acids or toxins, and of course for hydrating and soothing cracked skin. The Renaissance alchemists placed much greater emphasis on the states of cold, hot, dry, and wet, and also on the concept of the humors. I find that since so many of our contemporary health woes are actually psychological in origin, those metaphors are not nearly as helpful as the elemental ones for communicating the nature of our problems. That said, we come upon the final myth, and of course my strongest bias. I have long been enchanted by this myth and its symbolism without realizing its potential relationship to the others. And I think we all may have a tendency to sympathize more heavily with one of these modes of suffering and easily recognize it in others. Metaphors having to do with the bearing of heavy loads or being burdened with repetitive tasks seem to resonate with me more than the emotional ones. So this has been a really helpful thought exercise in seeking out some balance for that. Sisyphus was known for being greedy and cruel throughout his life, but it was his guile and deception in cheating death which earned him his station in Tartarus. When Thanatos was going to chain Sisyphus to a stone, he managed to trick the god of death into swapping places with him, binding death such that it actually caused more strife in the world than the perceived slight of mortality. Those who were sick and suffering were unable to find relief. Sacrifices couldn't be made, and soldiers could tear each other apart without any finality. The element of earth is very aware of the seasons of life and necessity of death, the ephemeral quality of our world and value of destruction in making new life possible. So defiance of death is particularly unnatural sin. Ares finally freed Thanatos and restored the balance, and as punishment, Sisyphus is sent again to the underworld. He manages to sweet-talk Persephone into releasing him, and lives out his days until his final death. But upon re-entry to Tartarus, he is given the impossible task of pushing a massive boulder up a hill only to have it roll back down. This is a metaphor for the meaninglessness and repetitive drudgery of life without the punctuations of ecstasy or tragedy which keep it from being monotonous. Death is a gift, an opportunity for more complex and interesting unfoldings, and without it we would not appreciate the life we have. So in cheating death, he robbed himself of the value of his own life and made himself a slave. Earth is the matter or medium, the substance of what is happening. It is the what, the stuff, the dense, slow-moving substrate, which is carrying forth the inertia and tendencies that the other elements are enacting upon it. So the healing power of earth, the medicine, is in the grounding and leaning into that physicality. All of the elements come together to generate the who in question. And when we go to ask ourselves this eternal quandary, who am I, we must consider first and foremost the foundational property of earth. We take up space, experience sensations with this clay doll we are piloting with our consciousness, and there is a lot of pressure from the higher modes of thought to discount our physical reality or regard it as lower. The paradox is that this body is the bridge between the physical and mental planes. Our ability to think is in some part rooted in the brain itself, and we can consciously impact our physiology by pure thought. Both must be carefully attended to optimize their mutual function. The key to overcoming the crushing weight of our own mortality and perceiving life not as a futile endeavor, but an opportunity to play, is the earthen value of patience. Patience is not simply enduring or stifling complaints about a tedious or uncomfortable circumstance, but something more like the coiling a snake does prior to striking. It is a mounting anticipation rather than dread. It is a crescendo, a build-up, an active stance of greeting, such as a child on Christmas morning. This is another superpower we can enlist in controlling time. Much like water, we can use earth to more fully engage with time and alter the way we see its passage. With patience, we are intensifying experiences we have marked as important. And we can do this with any happening in our life by virtue of our free will. It doesn't need to be a graduation, wedding, or surprise party. It can be as mundane as waking up in the morning or riding the bus. The story we tell ourselves about what is occurring matters. Patience takes a chore and makes it into a game. All elemental virtues are forms of magic we employ to bring ourselves more fully and authentically into the world. There is truly no upper limit to how much of ourselves we can be. And that is the paradox of mortality. In order to make life meaningful, we cannot keep it for ourselves. And truly, we wouldn't want to. Hell is often envisaged as what immortality within this lifetime would play out as. But through our deeds, our creations, legacies, and children, we can become effectively immortal, as a chain reaction that will continue to unfold long after we are gone. When we use patience to overcome futility, we find joy. Enjoyment, the derivation of joy from an experience, is the earth mode of happiness and is felt very viscerally. The heart seems to swell, the shoulders relax, we sink more fully into our body and feel that we fit very well into it. Our skin becomes comfortable rather than caging, and often we can have thoughts like, I could die right now and that would be all right. The more we are able to experience that feeling in a strange way, we are able to seize the day and live to the fullest. Peace with death, appreciation for the evanescence of our being here, actually frees us from the chains of things needing to play out a particular way, of inevitabilities or obligations. We are living on borrowed time, in bodies on lease, and the purpose of all of it is revealed through joy itself. It is in moments of clarity provided by these four modes of happiness, rapture, bliss, flow, and joy, that we can achieve true objectivity on what is really important and what we can do to expand those happy feelings within our lives. You cannot force it or choose to be happy. As with all of creation, the elements manifest in particular ratios that make certain conditions possible. When the conditions are right, happiness blossoms. We can take careful note of what led up to that feeling and pay attention to the synchronicities in life that indicate those conditions might be met. Some of them are very intuitive and obvious, such as taking good care of our bodies, hearts, and minds. Some are more complex, like surrounding ourselves with beauty, spending time in nature, and removing toxic or negative influences where we can. But rather than trying to manage and dictate our circumstances, the most sure way to cultivate more happiness is to simply listen, ask, turn a curious eye toward the world. It is incredible the kind of inconveniences a child will endure while in the throes of creative play. At any other time, a cup being the wrong color, a band-aid at the wrong angle, or a gram too much sugar can bring the entire ride to a screeching halt. But while playing, the hours fly by like moments. Sandcastle kingdoms rise and fall, and alliances that last a lifetime can be forged. And these things are no less valid than the seemingly world-shattering power plays made by adults. Love is the affinity which links and draws together the elements of the world. Love, in fact, is the agent of universal synthesis.